Welcome to Becoming Spiritual, a podcast about the magic that surrounds us and has always been a part of us. I'm your host, Heather Dolan, a passionate seeker dedicated to bringing together beautiful humans who are doing amazing things in this world. Together, we will explore healing modalities and practical spiritual practices that can enrich your everyday life. We will also hear stories of awakenings, many from people in the corporate world who have broken out of the spiritual closet. Wherever you are in your journey, know you have found a community of open-hearted individuals committed to making themselves and our world a better place. Welcome home. In today's episode, Natalie and I sit down with Beth Barling. Beth is a Wiccan elder, a high priestess, and theologian whose work bridges ancient wisdom with modern spiritual practice. With a master's degree in theology from Villanova University and a lifelong devotion to earth-based spirituality, Beth brings a rare blend of scholarly depth and intuitive knowing to everything she creates. She's the co-creatrix of the Serpent and the Dove, which she leads with her sister, Stephanie. And if you haven't listened to our episode with Stephanie on Earth Magic, definitely check that out because it was a really great conversation and you'll get to know Stephanie as well. But together, they've built a vibrant, heart-centered community, a space where priestesses gather, seekers learn, ritual is honored, and spiritual teachers from around the world come to share their gifts through workshops, circles, and transformational retreats. We talk about a lot of different things in this conversation, but if you've ever been curious about what Wicca actually is, we're going to talk about that, which I certainly was because I really didn't know much about it. Beth does a beautiful job weaving and storytelling around her Catholic roots and her theology studies and how they have really informed her spiritual path. She really reflects on how studying multiple religions has expanded her relationship with the divine and opened up a more inclusive, multidimensional way of understanding spirituality. It's quite unique. And also she speaks a lot about responsible spiritual leadership and what that means. And I think we need more people who truly practice discernment. They understand power and how it can be misused and want to make sure that people feel that sovereignty and agency in anything that they're doing, especially in spiritual practices. So you'll learn that Beth loves history and her and Stephanie have explored the world, leading retreats to allow others to understand with discernment, and they help people understand the context, trauma, colonization, and how religion can harm when it's misused. And what I love so much is she talks about how we can learn from history so that spiritual spaces today are built with integrity, safety, and reverence. We hope you enjoy this conversation as much as we did. Thanks so much for listening. Welcome back to Becoming Spiritual. I am excited to have my spiritual sidekick back on the screen with me today. So welcome, Natalie.
Thanks, Heather. It's good to be back.
We haven't recorded an episode together in a little bit, so excited to have you join us. And we are joined by Beth Barling. So welcome.
Hi, everyone.
You describe yourself as a Wiccan elder and high priestess, and then theologian, because you just, I think recently, right, finished your master's degree in theology from Villanova. And so I just would love to start there and break that down a little bit, because I feel like there's so many things that we're holding at once just with that description. And I think it's going to give a really good foundational lens to this conversation of where we're going to go today.
I've been practicing Wicca for long enough to go through 3 levels of priestess initiation. So that's what that means. So the first level of priestess initiation is just becoming a priestess. The second level is becoming a high priestess. And then the third level is after taking some time to really ground into the path and move on to having my own coven and becoming a Wiccan elder. And the role there is to really be a teacher for other women and men and anyone who was coming up through and looking to be a priest or a priestess in that tradition. So that's what it means to be a Wiccan elder. And Wicca is a religion, and a lot of what we do is as a religion that's, of course not as old as Christianity or Islam or anything that I studied in my time in school, but it's old enough to be responsible with the people that are coming into our containers, the people that are coming into our circles and our ritual spaces. It's sort of well-rounded enough to consider the sociology of what we're doing, the philosophy of what we're doing, the psychology of what we're doing. Of course, witchcraft in itself is a craft, and Wicca is more of the religious side. It's the religion. For me, it's the religion of my craft. And there is, I think, a great deal of importance being a spiritual leader and being a priestess. And that part is sort of all covered in Wicca. And then there's also, my theology degree is really studying connecting to the divine in all of the divine's forms and all of the divine's names. And it's really about just grounding more and more of this beautiful wisdom that God or the divine has placed in our world and in our hearts, so that me personally, I'm being as responsible and loving and as close to God as I can possibly be, in a way that continually is checking that what I'm doing is safe and that what I'm doing is love and that what I'm doing is creating a better world or just being part of a shift towards love. And that's, my very personal relationship with God and my very personal relationship with my priestesshood. But I would call me an amateur theologian. I don't see myself going back for a PhD. I think that I love where I'm at right now, and I think I want to get back out into the world. And I'm so excited to do that, to be away from the books. But that's really how those things are connected.
Thank you. I'm thinking about October and Halloween, All Hallows Eve. But if you're like me, you're watching probably Hocus Pocus. So you hear about the coven and you think about the witches from that perspective. And even using that word, there's probably a big misunderstanding of that religion, of Wicca and what that is. And then your roots are Catholic. We just had your sister Stephanie on to do our plant magic episode, which was so beautiful. And as I said in the introduction, Stephanie and Beth worked together, but she shared a little bit about the Catholic roots. I'm curious how you came to Wicca to learn and educate yourself and then wrap it all around with the theology studies to embrace all different religions and cultures, and what kind of brought you to that? Besides the divine, of course, but
that is an excellent question that I ask myself often. But I think for me, it does come down to connecting with the divine. And I think I was always very much in love with parts of my Catholic faith growing up. And then as I became a woman and as I sort of grew into who I was, I found that there was a journey calling that was outside of the boundaries of that religion. For me, it didn't mean leaving, well, for a while it did mean leaving behind a lot of the parts that I loved, but it was in search of something, and if you're Catholic, that the Holy Spirit was calling forth in me. Almost that whisper of love that was unable to be, I'm unable to ignore that. So this was, for me, a journey through all of the different traditions. I think it was finding the goddess, finding God in God's feminine form. And what does that look like? And what does that mean? And how does that shift my relationship with God? It was finding out what it means to have women minister to me. There's so many reasons, there's so many different aspects of what it means to have a woman ministering to us. And it's not just about men and women. It's very much just about coming into this presence of different perspectives of God and opening up this sort of purview of what it means to connect to the divine. And for me, this journey didn't start in Wicca. I think I was always interested in witchcraft, and I was always interested in what was on the other side. And also a lineage in our family of being conscious of the other side and being conscious of things that other people weren't, our neighbors weren't conscious of, our friends weren't conscious of, and having those conversations and really just going outside of my comfort zone and my religious borders to answer that call to not only find God, but to find my neighbor in a good way and to find myself, to know thyself, to know myself in a way that helps me really understand what my purpose is here, what my power is here. For me, this journey, it's always been sort of present in my bones, this journey of seeking more. And as devout and as beautiful as my parents are in their Catholic faith, they did this. They were a big part of this, sort of empowering me to understand divinity and God and my relationship with God. And I guess for me, this was my next expression of it, was outside those borders. And in doing so, I am closer to the beauty of that religion than I probably had ever been sleepwalking through that religion. So now it's sort of a conscious awareness and a conscious decision to really dig into those things that I took for granted in my lineage and to really understand them.
It's beautiful. I really love how you were speaking about the Holy Spirit calling to you, because people who haven't had much experience with Catholicism might not be aware that that's such a big part of it. And we take that very seriously. And it's not surprising there's so many ex-Catholic girls that end up witches. I think anyway, it's a trope in the media because it's so normalized that there's this etheric kind of spirit that is in communication with us. So I'm really curious what it was about Wicca and witchcraft in particular that called to you.
I think it was certainly the goddess. I think it was a big transformation for me. And in Christianity, I think, I don't want to speak for everyone, but I want to speak from my understanding of the Holy Spirit. That is the great mother. That is the paraclete to come. That is, when Jesus leaves, what is left but the Holy Spirit? What is left with us from the Gospel of John, if you want to get real Christian about it. But that mother, the one who's with us, always with us, watching us when we're in our darkest spaces. I don't know that my engagement with Catholicism in my childhood really brought that to the forefront, the way engaging with the goddess, engaging with what God would look like. Because if we are made in God's image, that means that God is the image of every single one of us, non-binary, female, male, everything in this world. So, shifting that, for me, a perceived understanding of what God was. I think that when I stepped into Wicca, the expansion of that possibility of what it looks like, and of course, very generically, there's the Lord and the Lady in Wicca, and it's really about connecting with both sides of God. That's a very grounded entry-level understanding of what I came into as an earlier priestess and as an earlier coven member. That is what called to me, really understanding God in different ways. And even small things, who calls God God the Father, who calls God Spirit, Brahmanic Hinduism and all the beautiful goddesses that exist there, and just this different way of really understanding God. And to me, it was always not only a closeness with God, but I think it sort of shifted how I loved myself more in a way, and how I was engaging with people who had the same seeking, the same spiritual seeking to find themselves and pull in those pieces of not only just God's self, but everything that's around us, energy that's around us, power that's around us, love that's around us, the lack of love that's around us, and trying to understand this world and this process and this beloved gift in a different way. So I think that Wicca, if I'm being very specific, I don't think it's something I could have put my finger on. I think when I landed in that container of men and women, it was just this moment of just continual things that I had understood as non-truths, but lighting my heart up. So there's this perception of the world that I live in. And, I suspect many of us live in whatever our perception of the world is, knowing what we know and only what we know. And when our truths are challenged, it's triggering. It's like affronting. And when my truth is challenged so deeply and so lovingly, it's something I have to hold in my heart and really tussle with. And it felt like that pull to go deeper and deeper. And it's where I am safe. It's where I am able to be a priestess. It's where I'm able to minister. And it really just gives me that opportunity to follow my own calling in a way that I had never experienced in any other religion. As a woman, as a mother, as a wife, and in different ways. And I think that for those that are available for that calling, it's a very warm and loving and held space.
It's so beautiful. When I met you last year at Maybon, and I talked a little bit about that in my episode with Stephanie, and learned so much. I remember being there and thinking, okay, we're just going to do like witchy things, which I haven't gotten to do yet. We're going to do all these things, but it was so grounded in the earth. So like bringing in that groundedness of the harvest and the physical like fruits and herbs and flowers from the earth and what that means and how we can have reverence for that. But then also that educational piece where you're sharing deeply about what different times of the year on the wheel of the year bring and what they mean, not just from a surface level of here's the harvest, but you shared so much in that day that I don't know if well-rounded is the way to capture it, but it's multidimensional. That's a better word for it. Multidimensional, where you're approaching it from all this groundedness, the divine piece, and then all this history. It's really interesting being in your presence and learning from you and seeing how much you love to teach. And I know you always have to stop yourself and say, I could go on about this one small thing for hours because it's so deep and you've taken the time to really devote and go deep. What do you see your purpose in kind of doing this in terms of religions and bringing these teachings and ministries to the collective?
Thank you for that. My purpose now is to continually share what has transformed me in such rigorous and positive ways. And the reason we continue our education, or I continue my education, and so almost relentlessly, is care for the souls of others. I think that stepping into a spiritual leadership role is really beautiful. And I am so a part of this spiritual wave, and I'm so a part of the woo world, and I'm so enamored and enchanted by all of these things. And at the same time, stepping into leadership is radically transforming for me. And I think for anybody who steps into a spiritual leadership role, I feel like there's a shift, and we do this when we train priestesses. There is a shift from just being a participant and feeling the beautiful energy of the space that you're in and feeling your siblinghood and feeling your infinite possibility and all of the things that one can do when we sort of take off the training wheels of programming and conditioning. But as a spiritual leader, I take such care when I come into a space to research what I'm doing, to practice what I'm doing, to make sure that what I'm bringing in is vetted through these levels of not gambling with people's souls. I sit with these things. I sit with these things in prayer. I sit with these things in ritual, and I'm with, God in my heart, or I have the divine, the goddess in my heart. We use higher power a lot because there's the coven side of what we do. And then there is the inner spiritual gathering space where we try to transcend those borders and find that oneness amongst our gorgeous differences. But I think the reason we pull our things together is we're not selling witchcraft irresponsibly. There is witchcraft and there's gorgeousness to that. And there's danger to that as well. But also being really conscious of a person's soul and a person's sovereignty and a person's boundaries and their agency, and always bringing those pieces in to responsibly show people that, I may be a way shower or a facilitator, but your relationship with the divine and your power is equal to mine. We're just trained differently. And this is my calling in this world. I read in Starhawk's Empowerment Manual one time how to sort of navigate this non-hierarchy way of living, how we're all equal and we all bring something the same to the table, the same beauty and magic to the table. Stephanie's a nurse. So if somebody has an infection, I'm not going to be like, put lavender on that. I'm going to send them to Stephanie, and Stephanie is going to do her nursing stuff. And if they have a question about the Gospel of Mary, she's going to be like, dear God, go see Beth. She loves talking about that. And if there's a fire, I'm not going to put the fire out. I'm going to call a fireman to put the fire out. So there's moments for us to take the lead, and then there's moments for us to sit back. And part of being a priestess, I think, is being incredibly responsible with how we carry people through. The education part, I am who I am. There's so much beauty in this world. And there is not enough time for me to learn everything that I want to learn. There just isn't. So to me, it's about bringing different voices to the table. I can talk a lot about Catholicism. I can talk a lot about Christian mysticism. That is my degree. That's what I focused on. I can talk a lot about Wicca and the practice and being a priestess and being a minister in this Western practice. There's billions and billions of other perspectives and lenses that I can't bring to the table by myself. So the education piece is amplifying those voices and bringing them in. And to your point, at Maybon especially, and just sort of dropping these trusted stewards of information so that it's not, when you say multidimensional, to me, it feels like more than just what we're bringing to the table. It's what we have been guided to bring to the table that we can't explain to you any more than you can. It's just a new voice. And it's really about opening up someone's magic and letting them just feel into the energy and beauty of what's possible. And then from a magical perspective, what does that even mean? You know, I was thinking of it the other day, what is magic? And just driving around on the road, and I'm thinking 1,000 years ago, this visual, this psychic moment from somebody 1,000 years ago, this would have been magic. That we can just get in the car and drive 5 hours away, and we're in a place that you would have taken days to get to. Like, there's so much magic in the mundane. And it's also about dissolving this cluster of what's possible. So Mabon, Mabon is the harvesting of the fruits. This is the season where we're harvesting the fruit. And that's so poignant for, I think, our ministry, my ministry is, how do I know what I'm doing is good? And for me, it is the fruits of my harvest. What fruits are rotten? What work is not bearing fruit? What is not positive fruit? And then what fruits are perfect? And really just sort of following that stream of thought and just really trusting in spirit and trusting in not making God in my own image, because that's easy. Boy, I would love her to be this precious lady who loves to read and is really mad that women aren't allowed to be priests or bishops or cardinals. But I'm pretty sure God is far more than that. So bringing in those other voices helps me to, not just usurp the voice. I'm not here to fix you. I'm not God. I'm just here as a sister on the journey. And there's so many more sisters and brothers and siblings on this journey. So that's how we form our retreat. Like when we do Mabon, that's critical that we do educate, because we don't want you to just be like, yeah, let's just, put some hair and some saliva in here and I'm going to take it home and you're never going to know what I did with all of your friggin' DNA. This is about you knowing what you're doing, you knowing exactly what you're doing so that you have the agency to say, that ain't for me, or I love that. And I'm going to follow up on this. I'm going to read what Starhawk said in the Empowerment Manual, or I'm going to read what Father Amorth is talking about when you talk about the fruits of your labor, like all these different voices that we bring to the table.
Okay, so I have to ask, because I don't know what Starhawk is.
Oh, I'm sorry. So Starhawk, she's like a foundational witch. So she is part of the feminist movement of the 70s. So she was probably one of the most famous witches in America, an American witch. And she is now in California, and she's just lovely. I mean, she does permaculture, and she just is somebody who's a guide for me as a Wiccan elder.
Okay.
Like, I tap into her work a lot. And I actually was talking to Stephanie about this the other day, that a lot of what we do in the Western world, New Age is not new. That's like Stephanie's, one of her favorite lines. New Age is not new. Like, we are appropriating so many religions, and not like, you know, like that's a whole nother podcast that I am not equipped to do. But I love tapping into her because she was not raised Christian. She was raised Jewish. And I remember I heard one time in a podcast that she was at a moment where she could have been a female rabbi, or she could have been a priestess, a Wiccan priestess. And she thought dancing naked under the moon was just so much funner than all of the studies a rabbi had to do. And I love that. I feel into that. Like when I think about my PhD and then I think about just being in ritual and meeting people, I'm kind of there. I mean, she's been a high priestess, an elder. She wrote The Spiral Dance. There's so many famous books that she's written. And the Empowerment Manual is sort of one that talks about group work and how to properly, a good way to sustain group activities, bringing groups together. She's an enormous activist. So she does a lot of activism work, how to bring those groups together, how to work with other people. When we, it's really beautiful for me to come on here and say that's really cool to have all these different voices at the table, but those voices fight. And how do we navigate those things from somebody who's been doing that since the 70s?
How old is she?
I think she's in her 70s. She's in California. She's sort of by wine country, like Napa, that area. But she lives on a farm, and it's such a cool, fun foundation she has all set up. So definitely check her out.
I am going to check her out. Thank you. Mm-hmm. Thinking about all the studies you've had with religion now, like I'm curious how you view all the different religions, and there's these wars that have erupted again in the Middle East, and just this constant like conflict in murder and genocide and all these things, and a lot of times in the name of religion. And we've been through this so many times in history. And for you right now in this moment, I'm curious how, it's amazing to me, I guess, how you stay in this place of like, it's all coming from a place of love and being in this space of like, you're doing this work out of love to teach and educate. And I think as much as you want to learn, I think we need you to teach. We need you. I know I get that message all the time of like, stop just learning everything and go talk to people about things because they need to hear, which is intimidating because I'm like, what do I know? And so I'm curious about what this looks like to you, knowing what you've learned and trying to be in this heart space.
That is the question, isn't it? Thank you for that. A lot of things that you said, I think are really important. The first thing that comes to mind is the more I learn, the more I know, the more I don't know anything. And I think that is the tricky part of it. In this present day, we are separated by religious borders, races, genders, gender ideology. There's so many ways that we have different lenses. We're separated by experience. We're separated by so many things. The reason I actually went searching is because I do believe that religion is the root of a lot of wars and a lot of fighting. And for those who have a religion, it could be the most important thing. God first, God, country, like whatever that... Such an American, but I don't know what that saying is. But I know that God is first. God, family, country. I think
God, country, guns. I don't know. I have no idea.
That would never be mine from New Jersey. But I think that, I know God is usually number one in that. And boy, what a way to use the profound heart of a human to manipulate them into an agenda of war and division and genocide. It's pure insanity. And some days I sit back and I reflect and I go, my God, I'm so grateful that I can see this. If I'm grateful for nothing else today, I'm grateful that I can see this and that the wool is not pulled over my eyes. But then there's, the immediate moment of where is the wool pulled over my eyes? So it's this constant grounding of learning the external world, different voices. Yeah. And as far as, what's happening, I don't want to speak too grandly, but there's so much religious bigotry and hate in different directions. And again, that's another thing where like the more I learn about it, the more I know I don't know anything. So to me, who's caught in the crossfire is who I pray for. Who's caught in the crossfire is who my heart is in alignment with, reaching out. How can I help? I feel like there's no bullet point to how to live life. It's really just choosing love. And that's not easy either. It's always, because again, your love can be what manipulates you into hatred for somebody else, for another neighbor. And it just feels like a constant ebb and flow and this earthbound gorgeousness of always being able to choose love, loving in a good way. And to me, like if you want to get wooed, to me, that's ascension, is learning how to love the way God loves. I think to me, that's pure ascension. It's just that love that just knows how to be love. It's the presence of love. It's love without any borders.
No judgment.
Yeah.
Hardest thing.
Hardest thing. It's
so
the work.
Hard. Yeah, it is. It is the work. Gosh, think if like everywhere in our small corners of the world, if we all could just, before we write that Facebook message or respond to a comment on Instagram or wherever, Twitter, we're going to be triggered. And I know that's all the work, but sitting back and saying, okay, if I can give this person love, like there was a podcast on forgiveness. And I mean, they were some of the most horrific stories of trauma that people have experienced and has been brought on them. Like guy lost his whole family in an accident with a teenager, and he went up to him and forgave him like right away at the accident and was like, I forgive you for what's happened. And like loving your enemy in that moment where most people would say they're the enemy, and thinking about that work, like if we all just in our small little areas just to stop and then check ourselves and say like, is this coming from a place of love? Which of course is going to be like, no, it's coming from all the other places, the things we've been conditioned or came here with or whatnot. Like, I don't know, once a day, like thinking about how that would ripple out of just before I respond to this or before I do this thing, I don't know what the story is. I don't know your story over here of why this happened or why you did this or why you flipped me off when I just was driving by and thought I was trying to do something nice. And next thing I know, you're whatever. I just think of like those ripples out there and eventually reaching the places that need it more. And not that we don't need it in this country, because, agreed, we definitely do. What do you have to say, Natalie?
These questions are why people go seeking, right? We're seeking this guidebook, like you were saying, Beth. Like, I want the checklist that helps me be a good human and find my purpose and make sense of all this chaos. But it doesn't exist. And that's where the more you learn on this journey, the more you accept, just as you were saying, that you don't know anything because you can't answer those questions. And anyone telling you they have an answer is probably lying to you. And that is such a big part of these structured religions from an empire sense. They take this purity and this divinity and it's subverted to control. And going back to something you said at the very beginning, that one of your ultimate purposes as a spiritual leader is this deep care for the souls of others. I think that's a fantastic thing for us to think about, either checking ourselves. Am I caring for the soul of someone else when I'm passing this judgment or reacting in this way? But also checking the leaders we seek out. Are they caring for my soul? Are they caring for the souls of others right now? Because I think this is a problem that we have with religion, that a lot of people who ascend to these leadership positions are perhaps attracted to the control. And there's power in that. And that is a check that we can all do with ourselves. And we'll really quickly be able to seek out, who really deeply cares for the dignity of my soul versus who's in it just for themselves. So I have no answers to any of these questions. And there's some freedom in that, actually, because that's ultimately humility. And I think that's something we've all lost in our culture, is the importance of humility. It's not keeping ourselves small. It's actually, from my perspective, being honest that you don't have the answers to everything. And you're at that level, like you said earlier, the same level as anyone else in your journey of seeking your relationship with divinity, all of these things. So, yeah. I really love that we're talking about this, because in all honesty, it's probably a question that I haven't felt equipped to talk about. Like, how do we make sense of all this violence right now? But the way you approach that, Beth, was so helpful. So I just want to say thank you for that. And it really speaks to your spiritual leadership.
Well, thank you for that. Appreciate that. And I think you did touch on the crux of that is, there are phenomenal priests and there are phenomenal imams and there are phenomenal rabbis and there's phenomenal spiritual leaders. And it is about that discernment, that judgment of, does this person really care about my soul? The hierarchies that we have in place, these old toxic stories, boy power is tempting. There's so many ways along. I think, I don't have to explain that to you. You just said it, that the power is tempting and there's a lot of danger out there. And with power comes great responsibility, to quote Spider-Man. Stephanie and I quote him all the time. But I think that it really is about constantly discerning what you're engaging with and deconstructing those old stories, like you were saying, the importance of that. And so this is, one of the things we talk about a lot is that like-minded community, that phrase. And I had a teacher one time tell me, like-minded community, because, my teachers definitely researched us so that they could call out our stuff. And he said, like-minded community, he went, yeah, they're talking about all these woo terms. And he was like, the Ku Klux Klan was formed in like-minded community. Mm-hmm. So just friendly reminder that like-minded community is not where the answers are. So there's the like-mindedness of, being in the energy of love, but really it's those challenging, triggering things that really help us to ascend those borders and boundaries.
I want to link that back, though, to what you said about Wicca, that was actually, it felt like a safe space for you to unpack these really hard, confronting truths that perhaps you hadn't found the place to do that. And these questions are the ones that trigger these contradictions, the stuff we have evidence for, but we want to believe something else, or no matter how much we search, we can't find the answer ourselves. This is where that place, it's like, you're safe to ask these questions and you're safe to explore and find answers that might be different to what we're teaching. I think that's profound.
Yes. And thank you for grounding me back into what I was saying. I think that is exactly what I found in Wicca. And I think that has a lot to do with, it's only how long has it been since we haven't been forced to have a religion in the Western world? This is not a long time in the history of humanity that we're not forced to believe in one way. And to think of the power and control that wielded, that you had to subscribe to the Catholicism or Lutheranism or Protestantism or, the Salem witch trials. We love teaching division and strife using the Salem witch trials because it's so uniquely American, that accuser, afflicted, and then the powers that be, the top 1%, the judges. But, we're in this really unique crucible, to use that word, where what does this world look like if we're not forcing religion on people? And that is unique and new. And for me, when I talk about the history of these old religions, what's nice about Wicca is that it is a new religion. It was birthed in this romanticism, like after religion is sort of displaced by science. And none of that stuff was real. And then there's this kind of swooping back in of, well, we're missing the enchanted world. We're missing the magic. And so there's all these things being birthed at the same time that are quite agentic, quite sovereign, quite, very unique journeys. And I think that is exactly what called me to Wicca. So thank you. I think it was this possibility that truth doesn't have a name or a label, that truth is a person or a thing. It's the divine, the universe. It's the continual journey. And there were not a lot of answers. And it was a space where I got to navigate what my answers were and come up with 90% of the answers wrong. And then continue to meet other people, being guided by spirit, being guided by the goddess, and just really feeling into this consistent course correction. Once we set the intention to be on these spiritual journeys, it's inevitable. I think that if we really lean into that intention, the intention moves more powerfully than my human even understands. So everything is landing. And I think too, as a bookworm witch, there's this judgment of baby witches that comes up a lot. And I'm always oh, I love those baby witches. They are on the beginning of some gorgeous journey. And I'm here for it. I love you. I love your crystals. I love your sage. We should talk about the sage crops in America and how we should take better care of them. This beginning journey is this precipice, the element of air at the beginning is so gorgeous. And, the deeper you get, the crazier, the more chaotic it gets.
Yeah.
And maybe that's a good segue as you're talking about being able to connect with all these different cultures and bring people to now these physical places to see and walk with those that have been persecuted or judged. And that's a big part of the work that you and Beth are doing at the Serpent and the Dove with the retreats. And I love how you say, I can tell you about this thing that happened, I guess Salem witch trial as a good example, and I can take you there and we can walk with the people. We can study and see what life was like or what this experience, which is, I guess, that deconstructing process again. And I know you did a Salem trip, and I remember reading the description and it was okay, you're not going there to make brooms and go to the witch museum and take some photos of being in the stocks. It was we're going to go deep. And you were there also to heal the earth of the trauma that exists. And so can you talk a little bit about the retreats?
Yeah, that is our favorite thing to do. It is my absolute favorite thing to do. I think from an early age, for example, it came up today. We've always traveled. And I think that worldview is everything to just understand what it means to live outside of my little precious bubble. And I remember at one point growing up, I had encountered Holocaust deniers. And without taking sides, I can freely say that, that was insanity. But I had been present to this Holocaust denier mentality. And my parents took us to Germany and we went to Dachau and we heard from German people what happened at Dachau. And it was horrific. And it was, one of those memories that I'll never forget. And it's something that changed me and transformed me. So when those conversations came up, it was no longer, is that possible? It was more of there's no way that's possible, that this is what happened. And I was there. That's a horrific story, but it sort of conveys the power of stepping outside of our doors and going on a journey, stepping outside of our comfort zone. And, we can read a lot in books And there's something very different about the presence of the land. There's something very different about feeling. I'll never forget the sadness of that space. Like, I was 17 when I went there, and I will never forget how horrifically sad it was. I'll never forget, like, my deaf brother was with us, and I'll never forget that moment where he realized they would have killed him too immediately. He would have been euthanized. So there was this, this moment of like really grounding, not only like feeling the energy of the land, but it was also recognizing that this is not they and us. This is, they would have killed my brother. Like, there's these very real, tangible, I don't want to quote this because I can't remember who said it, but, when one of us is not safe, none of us are safe. And that is another part of the journey. Like, if we're using the word ascension, like, if there's someone being hurt, if there's babies being hurt, there's nothing to stop my baby from being hurt. There's nothing to stop my family from being hurt. There's nothing to stop me from being hurt. Like, being very conscious and present to the suffering of others without suffering, without becoming hopeless. But I think that there's nothing like traveling to a place and trying to understand it. And I don't want to speak for Stephanie, but it is transformative in a way that pops the lid off of our bubble and expands our consciousness of this world and expands, how we ground our magic into this world. And, just from a wiser, more embodied, more present perspective. And, we've traveled to Asheville. I can read about the Cherokee. I can read about the congresswoman that we promised them would be able to go in. But when I'm there, I can have a conversation with the Cherokee, and they can talk about promises that weren't kept. And we can see, just really be a visceral presence to the community and just have those conversations. And again, bringing those voices to the table. Sometimes books and stories aren't enough, and even, you talked about social media. And the first thing that comes up for me is how much of that are bots? How much of that is programming and power trying to sell something? How ridiculous to destroy an entire country to make a buck. You can't take it with you, no matter what side you're on. I don't care what side you're on, but just like this grab for something that's not even, whatever. Safety. It's safety and fear, right? All that driven stuff. But in the presence of someone's face, it's really hard to say something stupid. Or if you do say something stupid, that immediate heartfelt response when you're like, oh, that was stupid. I offended them. Let me stop talking and listen for a second. Like that moment. And Salem is really special and unique because Salem represents religious hysteria. There's, in Wicca, we talk a lot about the satanic panic that happened in the 80s, but Salem sort of is the, why did the Puritans come here? Like, did we come here for religious freedom, or did we come here to create a religion in our image? Because we knew better than the Pope, and we knew better than Luther, and we knew better than the Church of England. Like, who came here to start religions? And something I'm very present in my ministry, like, am I creating the religion of Beth, or am I creating this space where voices are heard and amplified? And I know that there's still work to do, but in Salem, it's very obvious because it's over. It's actually this moment of, you go up there and the idea is that these young girls were like dancing naked in the woods, and they were brats, and they were pointing their fingers at people, and people were getting hung, and then they were scared. Like, there's this sort of story that floats around in our heads about what happened in Salem. And the reality, like reading historians and reading people who have dedicated their lives to this, just really witnessing how none of this would have happened if the top 1%, the judges, and that's not even like, if the judges, the powerful people, nobody would have died unless they decided that they were going to die. So there's the power dynamic, like who gets to decide who's right and who's wrong. And from a power perspective, really considering the poverty that was existing up there, the storms that were coming in, then the fights with the indigenous, like all these things that were happening. And then from a Puritan culture, witnessing like, if God is punishing us, then we broke our covenant somehow. And we're doing something wrong. So we really need to start killing people. We need to just do something to save us. So there's this craziness happening, this hysteria. And, Salem's like a perfect storm. And then we have these young girls. A lot of these young girls were being horrifically abused by the people they pointed fingers at. A lot of these young girls had no other resource to safety except to point the finger. A lot of these young girls had been through horrific trauma and were experiencing PTSD. Like, we'll never really know the full story, But again, there's all these different ways of understanding. And then the accused, the people who died. There's obviously shrines to them, and there's, it's horrific what happened to them. It's absolutely horrific. And then, just the horrors of what happens when religion takes us for a ride, when our version of religion goes awry. It can be compared to the McCarthy trials. It can be compared to so many different ways we use religion to wage war. And to me, I think it's very uniquely American. I think it is an American tale, and it's replaying all the time. So being there and being in the presence of the story that's finished, and beyond the written word and beyond the story and beyond how we teach these different things, and sending blessings and love to everyone in Salem and to everyone I'm even speaking of, because their story is over, and just sending an enormous amount of gratitude for how much we learned as witches. Was anybody really practicing witchcraft? I have my thoughts on that, but the reality is probably not the way we think they were practicing witchcraft. And now, today, though, there's this beautiful healing, this beautiful reclamation that's by people who identify as witches, and they're reclaiming that land. And when you're in Salem, you can feel the pain in Salem. And that, I think, is important. That's something that we can't feel from a storybook. When you're in Salem and you walk through the gallows, you walk through the graveyard, and you see how people are still assaulting the grave of Judge Hathorne. And there's just so much energy present, and being present to that energy, that feeling, what's alive in the land. That's another part of the story. And talking to the locals and talking to the historians of that area, it just really helps me, and I'm hopeful that the people who come on the retreats with us look at things through a different lens. And how does that relate to witchcraft? Healing the land, thanking the land, blessing the land, understanding the story of the land and the hurts and the pain. And that, I think, is an enormous part of our practice, is grounding love into our land and grounding truth and beauty and abundance back into our land. And again, you said the butterfly effect, that flutter, how that moves, like that one moment of maybe healing a pebble, and whoever steps on that pebble carries that beauty with them. And even prayer, most witches don't talk about prayer, but I bet a lot of them do. That's a big thing right now, that we're over the best wishes and prayers or hopes and prayers, like that kind of thing. And I understand that. I understand that phrase. But also, don't neglect the power of your intention and your meditation and your ritual and your chanting. Like, your intention, your energy are very, very powerful. And those prayers, to me, they work. And I think being present in Salem, I can't go there and be kitschy. I can't go there and not respect the local witches. I can't go there and not know the stories of the energy there. Instead of just assuming it was a bunch of dumb girls in the woods who were finger pointing and these men and women got killed because of it. It's so much bigger than that. And it really shows that, no one's all good and no one's all evil. Like, humanity is very diverse, and no one's right and no one's left, and no one's communist and no one's all capitalist. Like, there's the diversity, the divinity that exists within us, like recognizing how diverse and magical we are in those moments, just by looking in the reflection of community and understanding that, even with like Marcus Aurelius and the stories of Greco-Roman times, who's good, who's bad, who's this, who's that. The human is so varied. I mean, I change my mind sometimes 7 times a day. I am a whole different person than I was 3 months ago. Yep. How to minimize the beauty and power of humanity, of one human. I think that that's another way, like the magic, how we transcend these limitations of who we are, and that control, and that it feels like a boot on the neck of one's beauty and power. That's why we travel. We love, love, love traveling. And New Orleans is magic personified. And we have been planning this retreat to New Orleans for 3 years. Stephanie and I, it's one of our favorite places to go for so many reasons. Reasons known to us and reasons unknown to us, to be honest. And there's a very complicated history there, an incredibly complicated history, an incredibly complicated present day in New Orleans and in America. So preparing for this retreat has been a real labor of love and humility, of this not really being our story. Voodoo is not our craft. And, voodoo, in a lot of ways, this was people who were not allowed to practice their religion. Yeah. And they were forced to blend their religion with Catholicism and what gorgeousness has been created there and what's living in those walls, what's living in those streets. And that retreat is heavily reliant on local practitioners to teach us because it's just not a story we can teach. But my God, it's such a transformative place. Stephanie and I already met with all the people that we're going to be teaching. And a big part of our magic is bringing, like the things that transform us and the things that bring us closer to our divinity and to our neighbor's divinity and to God. It's the next step. If the fruits at that place in New Orleans were gorgeous, that's where we're taking our community. That's what we're offering next. So that's sort of how we move when we do our magic and our retreats. I'm a talker. Thank you for listening.
No, you're very passionate. I love it. And it's interesting. It's so funny what's come up the last couple of days. I was talking to my kids and I'm trying to think how this came up with Hurricane Katrina in New Orleans. And my twin sister and I went to New Orleans when they started letting lay people come who were not like skilled laborers and contractors that could do work that was needed and to clear space so that other volunteers and stuff could come in. My sister and I went with another friend and her dad who wanted to come. And I think he just secretly wanted to make sure we were going to be okay because got like the National Guard and tanks rolling by. And, we're down in the lower ward and just see, it looks like something I've never seen before. And I've gone on mission trips and seen pretty poor places. It just, to me, was, we're in the lower ninth ward and it was abandoned. There were just tanks literally rolling through there, which I'd never seen before in America. And I, like my sister and I are like, this feels like we have stepped out of time and we are not in the United States of America. Like this is insane to see this and see all the buildings that had the X's and how many bodies were found in there and marked and what was taken out. And we were working in this place called Musicians Village to rebuild houses with habitat. And, the city, it was a year and a half, I think. And I mean, it was empty. It was a ghost town. And I hadn't been to New Orleans before, but we're on like the main streets and stuff. And I mean, we're going into like these famous bars and there's no one. I mean, it was a ghost town. And we met so many local people who were so beautiful, shop owners that were just trying to keep their shops open. And we're like, are these going to ever open? And they're like, they left, like they had to leave for safety or had nothing left. And they probably will never be back. I mean, and hearing those stories, and that's not even like the history, that was like present day, really. I saw, that you were doing that retreat there. And I would love to go back for a different perspective of where a lot of that came from, because there's a lot of othering there. Like you can tell it's like there's an obvious like second-class citizen there that you feel being there. And then I had this guilt as a white woman of feeling privileged and being in this way. So I can only imagine being there and really learning, having locals who want to teach you where, you have to be a little careful sometimes when you're having just conversations and you don't want to offend someone and you don't want to ask the wrong question out of curiosity and maybe a place of love, but someone might not receive it that way. That you kind of set up these containers to be able to allow people to have those experiences and conversations is really special.
Yeah, thank you. Thank you. We tend to ask the stupid questions before people get there.
Yeah.
That's why we go out first.
Yeah, that makes sense.
Check out an area. And I think everything you're saying is exactly why we travel. And it's right in our backyard. I mean, we did that UK and Ireland retreat and there were so many different places we wanted to go in Europe because there's so much history there and we're history geeks. And then we were like, oh my God, we're just missing so much right in our backyard. And like you said, New Orleans is, I'm in the Northeast and it is a whole different world to even Delaware. I'm in New Jersey. It's very different in Delaware. My daughter goes to school in Maryland. It's so different in Maryland and it's gorgeous. And then at the same time, it can be, horrifying. And that is why we use that, especially with New Orleans. We did a lot of those tours with beautiful tour guides, the Voodoo tour and there's the Plantation tour. I believe it's the Whitney Plantation where you go in through the servants' quarters, slaves' quarters, we'll call it what it is. It's a whole opposite way of looking at the cotton plant, the old plantations. It's not cutesy. I mean, the property is beautiful, this old plantation, but it's, of course, the story of the human, the human journey through there. It's a perspective that Stephanie and I are, when we're there and we're talking about the colonization of New Orleans and what that looked like. It's Catholic colonization, Spanish and French, and it's very different from the colonization as I've understood it up here in New England area. just listening to them talk, I mean, we were silent. Silent, and we talk.
Yeah.
Like it was, it's profound, and it's so important to just be present for another human's journey and just sort of deconstruct one's ideas of the human experience. From one side, it's how to love our neighbor, and then the reflection is if the divine is a reflection of all of us, and we're like fractals of the divine or puzzle pieces of the universe, however that lands with you, with anyone. Understanding our neighbor in that way just expands us into universal energy and God and the goddess. So
hopefully allows us to maybe move closer to love thy neighbor and love thy enemy, and be able to realize, like, going back to where we started, it's not good or bad, not having that polarity and taking that away, but just saying, can we love each other? Because whatever lens they're coming at this from is different from my lens. And we don't have to understand all of that to just say what's in the middle. The common part is the love.
I feel like that's everything. It's like love and the lack of love. And I think that motivates everything, even people who are doing evil.
Yeah.
Quote, evil. It's, how close are we to love and how close are we to the lack of love, fear, those two polarities, and maybe transcending that a bit. Yeah. I think that's a bigger thought than we have time for, but
yeah. Well, thank you. Thank you for this conversation. I'm grateful for the work that you're doing and you and Stephanie are doing together at the Serpent and the Dove, with even just a small piece and exposure. I've gotten it's just so obvious, the care. And I know you touched on that so much, and really the reverence for people and taking this spiritual leadership so seriously, and being in your presence, you can tell, even just the language you use, you're not trying to force ideology on someone or say it has to be this way, but you're giving so much perspective, so much context, so that people can then make their own choice and have that agency and that sovereignty to choose what feels like truth to me and what do I leave, and just trying to not judge it. And I know that's a big thing I'm working on, is not judging it as it's wrong or bad. Maybe it's just not for me, and I'll just leave that piece because it doesn't resonate for me, and that's okay. And I feel like if we would do that more often than not, we would not be where we are, because we could just leave things and let people have their beliefs and their truths. And, just the work you're doing is so important. And, thank you for sharing that with us. I always like to ask before we wrap if there's any practical guidance or wisdom that you would offer to anyone listening here.
Oh, that's a big question.
Oh.
And I think if it's coming, I have a million answers to that, but I think the biggest one is self-study. Like not being afraid to understand yourself, know thyself. I think that's really important. You have an opportunity to really uncover who you are, and that I think is the whole journey. And the more we uncover about ourselves, the things we like, the things we don't like, we start to really see our neighbor as a human. I think that's a big part, being able to love our neighbor. If we can love the parts of us that have been labeled bad or not likable, once we sort of transcend our human and see the divinity within us, it makes it easier to see the divinity in our neighbor and love our neighbor in that way.
Beautiful guidance.
Thank you.
That's a beautiful way to end.
Yay.
Well, thank you. Thank you, everyone, for listening. We will share all of Beth's contact information and resources in the retreats, because I know they're filling up, and I know you have some spots left. So we will share all of that information so people can find you and the Serpent and the Dove information. But thank you for joining us and sticking in for this conversation. I know we went a little, a deep dive on, well, probably it's not even scratching the surface for you, but for for us in this podcast, I think a good dive into some of these beliefs. And I think if we can keep educating ourselves, and what you said, the self-study, so important. I hope people take at least that piece away and know that in the end, it all comes down to love.
Yeah.
Thank you for sharing with us today.
Thank you so much, ladies.
Thank you so much for taking time out of your precious day to listen to our podcast. If this episode resonated with you, we would love for you to share it with someone you love. That would mean the world to us. Also, if you feel called, please follow our show so you will know when a new episode drops. If you want to go one step further, you can even rate this episode, as it allows our podcast to find its way to others. Lastly, we've done our best to share resources that you might find helpful in the show notes, whether that's a book recommendation or a website we referenced during the episode, a free resource, or more information on a guest who took their time to speak with us and share their knowledge. We would love for you to support their work too. You can find more information on our podcast website at becomingspiritual.me. We love you and can't wait for you to hear the next episode. Until then, know you have a place where you are welcome and you are loved. Welcome home.